Welcome back to the show. Very nice to have your company today. Moral leadership is not about being able to look stakeholders in the eye and tell them you've delivered the best results. It's about looking at yourself in the mirror and being able to tell yourself you've done the right thing. Being able to live with your choices when these are tested against timeless values, not when tested against quarterly results or the low bar of regulatory compliance. It's the words of my next guest in a white paper titled "It's Time for Moral Leadership." Anthony Howard was once a navigator in the Merchant Navy, now is Managing Director of the Confidere Group, from the Latin con, together, and fidere, to trust or rely on. He helps people and organisations navigate where they are and where they want to go, providing confidence to high-level leaders, facilitating leadership dialogues, connecting people with ideas, and providing leadership consulting services to those organisations who want to seriously foster moral leadership. He is known colloquially as the CEO Whisperer. He's acted as a confidant to CEOs across every market sector, one of the few Australians indeed to participate in one of the world's most prestigious leadership events, the Performance Theatre, which is an invitation-only meeting of global CEOs and top-class thinkers wrestling with the big questions of the day. Anthony Howard joins me now. A warm welcome to you.
Thank you, Carson.
The biggest challenge, I would have to say, after reading through the white paper, is assuming the moral compass actually is something we all have in our back pocket. If you've been brought up with a serious lack of any conscience, or it's become so sullied over the years, what alerts you to kind of suddenly snap out of that laissez-faire, you know, c'est la vie attitude?
Yeah, very interesting question. The difficulty for a lot of people is exactly as you say. You may have grown up in an environment where you have a lack of guides. So who then do you follow? And when that person then enters the workforce, that's when I think leadership becomes really critical. If you join an organisation where the CEO or the boss or the person you report to sets a wonderful example and is a great model, then I think you will adopt and take on quite wonderful values. But if you join an organisation that may lack some sort of direction or work for someone who lacks a moral compass, I think you're going to adopt those values too. So that's one of the challenges we face.
You do say we all have it in us. To kind of paraphrase, we can all possess that moral leadership, but it can be learned. But what is the spur to learn, as it were, when you talk about the bottom line being really less important, but that's increasingly the yardstick that leaders are judged on?
It is the yardstick that leaders are judged on, but a lot of leaders then, it comes, I think, from an element of self-reflection. And there's a moment, I think, in one's life where a leader or anybody says, is this really what it's all about? Is making the dollars, making the numbers really what matters? And the sort of question that's been asked for thousands of years by the Greeks and others really is, well, what does it mean to live a really good life? And the moment you start asking that sort of question in the context of your work or anything else you're doing, that's when it starts to unearth, what am I following? What guides me? What leads me? How do I become, you know, a better person, a better leader, a better businessman, businesswoman, whatever it might be?
Strength in numbers as well. Now, imagining that this CEO possesses the requisite moral compass, but those around the boardroom table are intent on undermining at every turn. On a practical level, how do you sail above that one? How do you navigate your way out of that?
I don't necessarily agree that everyone around the table would not want to do the right thing and follow a moral compass. So in a general sense, most of the people I've met and interviewed want to do the right thing, want to do a good thing, may be confused at times about what exactly that means, but they're striving to find it. And the dilemma and the challenge that I find in the people that I interview is just working that out. You know, we have competing agendas around the table, we have competing perspectives, competing views. How do we resolve those things? It's never an easy discussion for a CEO.
When the rubber hits the road, though, Anthony, and you have a choice between putting one thing to market, that is to say, even down to cold hard numbers, which is what, you know, our trade is all about, and taking a stand, and even those underneath you, those in the trenches who are doing the number crunching, if you're actually undermining their efforts, you're believing, and you write, that you know, that there is every right to speak up, to challenge. Is that realistic?
For the CEO to challenge?
No, for a minion to kind of come back and say, hang on, you know, that isn't the kind of ethical behaviour that I stand for, that I thought you represented. I mean, it's fine in theory. I'm just putting it to you that in practice,
it can be very difficult.
Sayonara for any promotion.
It can be a life-changing event. Yeah. I interviewed Paul Moore, who was the whistleblower at HBOS in Scotland, and he had this very issue, and I spoke to him about the dilemma and how he resolved it. He looked at the organisation and said, the direction we're heading, the business is at risk. The way we're operating puts the business at risk, and I can't stand by and just watch the ship sail onto the rocks. And he went to the board about that, and his advice was ignored, and he subsequently lost his job.
So the moral of the story was what?
He paid a heavy price for doing the right thing, which was only very recently in February of this year.
Would he have done it any differently?
I asked him that question, would you have done it any differently? And his big insight was, no, I wouldn't have done it any differently, but I would have spent more time building relationships with the people. He didn't feel he had a sufficient relationship with people to be able to have the level of conversation that he was having with them.
It's interesting what you say there about the board kind of closing ranks, because back to my earlier point, who really takes the initiative and at what price? If you're a non-executive director sitting there because you're judged to be, you know, bringing in a suite of skills,
level of expertise,
correct, but you know that you're skating on thin ice. If you actually take a stand, well, thanks, it's been nice knowing you, but next time round it'll be we won't be seconding you.
And I think we could look at many examples in recent years, GFC examples, where we wish that people had have stood up, and I think there'd be people reflecting now saying, I should have spoken up at the time and I lacked the courage to do so. And those people who have built courage through their life and have been people who have stood for what is right, have developed, if you like, a moral muscle and an ability then in that moment to say, speak up and do what's right.
Well, you point to Mother Teresa, Aung San Suu Kyi, you also list there Nelson Mandela, although I was interested by that one because, of course, at one point in his life he was an advocate of violence. How did you get him on the list knowing that?
That was something that I had to wrestle with myself, because I would have, some years ago, seen him as, you know, a violent terrorist. Yeah. And I think, and this is your earlier question about, you know, growth and development, you know, Nelson Mandela himself would say that he has advanced from that position, and I think we have to have a graciousness with people that allows people to grow and develop and change.
Not least of all politicians.
Yeah, and he's grown into that.
We're taking a break. We're returning with my guest Anthony Howard in just a moment.
That could be a simple mistake, or a deliberate move for a long-term advantage.
Perhaps.
But no, you're someone who plans ahead. I'm thinking you don't make a move unless you've thought things through. And if you don't have an answer, you'll find someone who does.
ANZ Wealth Managers can help you make the right moves to achieve your long-term goals.
Nice move.
Welcome back in a discussion on moral leadership with my guest Anthony Howard from the Confidere Group. Anthony, you say in your white paper it's time for moral leadership, and I quote, it's time for moral leaders to demonstrate moral leadership and balance the equation. Given that they've possessed it, what's held them back from doing just that?
I think we've had a number of moral leaders who've done the right thing. But we're more and more moving into an environment where it's more crucial for them to stand up and do what's right and say what's right. So, for argument's sake, pre-GFC, there was people who should have stood up and said the right thing and done the right thing. Now, I think a lot of it is the movement towards sustainability and the environment as well. We've sort of shifted that conversation to look at business and say, what does it mean to create and build a sustainable business? And we're now asking people as business leaders to think in a much longer term, even though there's short-term pressures on them, we're asking them to think in much longer term time frames. That then imposes on them moral frameworks and moral decisions they have to make with regard to the longevity of the business and the people who work for them.
You're heading offshore shortly to a destination, I don't know where it is, but it's of some significance when it comes to the Performance Theatre. The promise of that event is to wrestle with the biggest questions of the day. What's on the agenda this year?
The event this year will be held in Istanbul, and each year the event is held in what they call a city of note, and they use the city as a paradigm for the big questions of the day. And so obviously in Istanbul, where East meets West, cultural mix, some of the questions that we will be wrestling with are the big cultural questions of the day, the shift, not just the shifts from East to West and some of those sort of transitions, but global trade type questions, the rise of different religious influences. There'll be a wide-ranging conversation on some very interesting topics.
What generally comes from that? You know, have you seen it in practice, the actual implementation, to take it away from just being a talk fest?
I had that question with the first one I went to, is this anything more than a talk fest? Having now attended 3, and this will be my 4th event, I think at one level it is a talk fest, but at another level it is an opportunity for people who have significant responsibility for organisations and countries and so forth to meet with others who are interested in the big questions and have a point of view. I remember talking to Paul Polman, the head of Unilever, there, and the moment Paul Polman said, you know, the business cannot prosper in a community that fails, that transformed the thinking of everybody else there. So RJ Banga at MasterCard goes back and thinks, right, what does it mean for my organisation? So it's having that level of insight and reflection from people who are grappling with the big issues that enables people. We're turning ship slowly, but it enables people to go back and say, I can do that in my organisation. Let's try that here.
As you say, step 1 is the self-assessment to actually identify where you're at on that journey. Anthony Hart, thank you so much. Appreciate it.
Carson.
And that is our show. Anthony Hart from the Confidere Group. We'll see you next week.
Today, Plan urgently needs people like you to sponsor a child. When I saw Plan's life-saving work, I was inspired to sponsor a boy and a girl. I've seen how sponsorship gives you a personal connection with a child.